Pennsylvania, December 24th, 2023. The engine ticked into the silence of a frozen driveway. My name is Claire Dawson, and 10 feet behind me, in the trunk of a rental car, sat $96,000 in cold, hard assets. To the people inside that glowing brick house, I was a failure, a drifter, a cautionary tale. They didn't know I was the secret architect of their sudden good fortune. Tonight I wasn't just bringing gifts, I was bringing a test. I gripped the wheel, watching the snow erase the world, knowing that by morning, I would either be their savior or a ghost. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The engine ticked. It was a rhythmic dying sound in the silence of the driveway. I sat with my hands at 10 and 2 on the leather steering wheel, gripping it hard enough to turn my knuckles the color of the snow piled on the lawn. The car was warm, a sealed capsule of climate-controlled safety, but outside the Pennsylvania winter waited. My parents' house waited. It stood at the top of the sloped driveway, a 2-story brick fortress glowing with aggressive holiday cheer. Wreaths hung in every window, centered perfectly. The gutter lights were straight lines of white LEDs. It looked like a catalog photo for a life that worked. I checked the dashboard clock, 6:02 p.m. I was 2 minutes late. In this house, 2 minutes was a statement. It was a failure of logistics. I didn't turn the car off immediately. I breathed in the smell of the rental new upholstery and artificial citrus, and looked at the front door. I wasn't here to fight. I wasn't here to beg. I was here to run a diagnostic test on the people who raised me. For 3 years I had kept my distance, building a life in Chicago that they knew nothing about. They thought I was scraping by. They thought I was finding myself. They didn't know I had already found myself, and that the person I found was capable of writing a check that could clear their debts in a single afternoon. Dread and hope, I said aloud. The voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded flat. I wanted them to pass. That was the stupid, childish truth buried under my ribcage. I wanted to walk in there and be wrong. I wanted my father to look at me without scanning for defects. I wanted my mother to hug me without pulling away to check the roast. If they could do that just once without knowing about the money, then the money would be theirs. It was a simple transaction. Love first, then the reward. I killed the engine. The silence rushed in heavy and cold. I stepped out. The air smelled of wood smoke and ice. The wind cut through my coat, but I didn't button it. I needed to feel the cold. It kept me sharp. I walked to the trunk. I opened it and stared down at the inventory. I didn't pack bags. I packed assets. On the left side lay the camouflage, the standard gifts, a cashmere scarf for my mother, gray safe, a bottle of 18-year-old single malt for my father, a designer clutch for Hannah, the kind I knew she had pinned on her inspiration board. They were wrapped in silver paper with blue ribbons. They looked expensive enough to avoid criticism, but cheap enough to maintain the narrative that I was struggling. Total value $4,000. On the right side lay the truth. I reached for the leather portfolio. It was black, nondescript, the kind you buy at an office supply store. I unzipped it. The sound was like a zipper on a body bag. Inside, 3 white envelopes sat against the leather. They were not wrapped. They were not festive. They were heavy, high-grade paper. I pulled the first one out halfway. I needed to see the number again. It anchored me. The cashier's check was made out to the bank that held my parents' mortgage. $62,418.32. I had impersonated my mother on the phone 3 days ago to get the payoff quote. It was a federal crime technically, but I was good at logistics. I was good at fixing things. The second envelope, $24,000. Hannah's student loans. The debt she used as a shield, the reason she couldn't buy a condo, the reason she needed help. The third envelope, $10,000. A donation to the St. Jude's Food Bank made out in the family name. My father talked about charity at every Christmas dinner. He talked about the obligation of the fortunate. He never wrote the check. I did. $96,000 in a $5 folder. I ran my thumb over the edge of the checks. They were sharp. They were real. This wasn't a lottery win. This wasn't crypto luck. This was net profit from my firm, Velox Solutions. This was the result of 3 years of 16-hour days fixing supply chains for companies that were bleeding cash. I had stopped the bleeding. I had earned the right to stand in this driveway. I tucked the portfolio into the bottom of my oversized tote bag, burying it under a change of clothes and a toiletry kit. I didn't want it seen. Not yet. The reveal had to be timed. If I showed the money too early, the test was void. They would love the money, not me. I slammed the trunk. The sound cracked through the neighborhood like a gunshot. I shouldered the bag and walked up the path. The salt crunched under my boots. I stopped at the door. I could hear them inside. Muffled voices, laughter, the sound of glass on granite. They were happy. They were complete. I was the variable that was about to disrupt the data set. I rang the bell. It took 10 seconds. The door swung open. My mother stood there. She held a glass of white wine in one hand, her fingers gripping the stem tightly. She wore a green silk blouse that I remembered from 5 years ago. Her hair was perfectly sprayed, a helmet of chestnut and gray. She looked at my face. Then she looked at my boots. Then she looked at the bag on my shoulder. She didn't smile. She adjusted her face into a smile. "Claire," she said, "you're here." "Hi, Mom." She leaned in. I smelled Chardonnay and expensive face cream. Her body was stiff. She patted my back twice, 1, 2, and pulled away before I could return the pressure. It wasn't a hug. It was a greeting you give to a contractor. Come in," she said, waving me past her. "Don't let the heat out. The heating bill is already criminal this month." I stepped into the foyer. The heat hit me dry and intense. The house looked exactly as I remembered, only more so. The tree in the great room was 12 feet tall, draped in gold ribbon. The banister was wrapped in fresh garland. It was a performance of a home. My father was standing by the fireplace. He looked older. The lines around his mouth were deeper, etched by years of disapproval. He held a tumbler of dark liquor. He didn't move toward me. He stayed by the fire, guarding the warmth. "Claire," he said. He nodded. It was a nod of acknowledgement, not welcome. "Traffic." "Fine," I said. "Roads were clear." "Good. You're late, though." 2 minutes, I said. "Time is money," he said. It was his favorite aphorism. He didn't know how much money 2 minutes of my time was actually worth. He looked at my coat. It was wool Italian tailored. He didn't see the cut. He saw black. He saw utilitarian. "You look tired," he decided. "Still working those odd jobs." "I'm working," I said. "Consulting." "Consulting," he repeated. The word tasted like vinegar in his mouth. "Right. Between things." "Hannah is here," my mother interrupted. She gestured toward the living room archway. "She got in yesterday, flew first class. Her company insisted." "That's nice," I said. "It's impressive," my father corrected. Hannah appeared in the archway. She was the sun to my shadow. She wore a red velvet dress that hugged her frame. Her hair was a blonde waterfall, professionally blown out. She held a wine glass, and she was glowing. It wasn't just the wine, it was the radiance of the chosen one. "Claire." She didn't walk. She glided. She reached me and squeezed my arm. She didn't hug me either. She squeezed my bicep like she was checking for muscle tone or malnutrition. "God, you're skinny. Do you eat in Chicago? You look like a ghost." "Good to see you, Hannah," I said. "You look healthy." "I feel amazing," she said. She spun a little, letting the skirt flare. "It's been a monster year. Just a monster year." She looked back at our parents. They watched her with a hunger that turned my stomach. They fed on her success. It validated them. I was the control group, the failure that proved the experiment worked on at least one subject. "Well," Mom said, clapping her hands. "Dinner is in 40 minutes. Hannah, you sit down. You've had a long quarter. Claire, put your bag in the mudroom. I need help with the potatoes." The hierarchy reassembled itself instantly. The successful daughter sat. The drifting daughter served. "Sure," I said. "I'll wash up." I walked to the mudroom. I set the bag down gently. I touched the leather shape of the portfolio through the canvas. Patience, I thought. Let them dig the hole. I walked into the kitchen. It was hot. The oven was blasting. Pots simmered on every burner. My mother handed me a peeler and pointed to a mound of potatoes in the sink. "Peel," she said. "And don't take too much of the meat off. We don't waste food." I stood at the sink. I turned the water on, keeping the stream low so I could hear the living room. The acoustics in the house were excellent. Their voices carried over the hum of the refrigerator. "So tell us about the new contract," Dad said. I could hear the leather chair creak as he leaned forward. "This is the big one." "It's huge," Hannah said. Her voice was loud, projecting confidence. "It's a logistics firm based in Chicago, Velox Solutions. They're expanding to the West Coast, and they need a total HR overhaul. Recruiting, compliance, culture building. It's a six-figure retainer." My hand slipped. The peeler bit into my thumb. I didn't flinch. I watched a bead of blood well up and washed it away under the cold tap. Velox Solutions. She wasn't just bragging about a job, she was bragging about my company. "And you landed this?" Dad asked. "On your own?" "Basically," Hannah said. "I mean, the firm has been trying to get a meeting with them for months. Their COO, David Miller, is notoriously difficult. But I got him on a call. I pitched him the new strategy. He loved it. He said I was exactly the kind of energy they needed." I stopped peeling. I stared at the potato skin curling in the sink. David Miller, my COO. My right hand. I remembered the conversation clearly. David had walked into my office 2 weeks ago holding a tablet. "We need an audit," he'd said. "We're growing too fast." "I found a firm in Philly that looks decent. One of their associates has your last name, Hannah Dawson." Any relation I had looked at her photo on his screen. She looked polished. She looked hungry. "She's my sister," I had told him. "Give her the interview. If she's competent, hire the firm." But David, "Don't tell her it's me. Not until I say so. I want to see what she does." "That's my girl," Dad said from the other room. The pride in his voice was thick enough to choke on. "You walked in there and took it." "I did," Hannah said. "David said the founder is some recluse, doesn't do meetings, but I'll meet him eventually. I'll charm him too." "Him," Mom said, stirring gravy next to me. "Always a him." "Actually," Hannah's voice dropped a register. It became conspiratorial. "David mentioned the owner is young, like our age, started it from a laptop." "Must be nice," Dad grunted. "Getting lucky like that." "Right," Hannah laughed. "Probably some tech bro who got venture capital money and thinks he's a genius. But hey, as long as his check's clear, I don't care." I resumed peeling. The motion was mechanical. Swipe, swipe, swipe. She didn't know. She legitimately didn't know. But she had seen the contract. She had seen the address. She had spoken to David, who had a framed photo of me and him on his desk from the day we crossed $1 million in revenue. Had she not looked? Or was she so focused on her own reflection in the Zoom camera that she missed the reality in front of her? "You're quiet," Mom said. She didn't look at me. She was focused on the gravy. "Just listening," I said. "Hannah is doing so well," Mom said. It was an accusation. "She pushes herself. You could learn something from her drive, Claire." "I'm sure I could," I said. I rinsed the potato. It was clean. It was white and raw. Hannah was taking credit for a job I gave her. She was mocking the lucky tech bro who was actually her sister paying her salary. The envelope in the trunk, the loan payoff, suddenly felt heavier. It wasn't just a gift anymore. It was leverage. I looked through the pass-through window. Hannah took a sip of wine, basking in Dad's adoration. She looked satisfied. She thought she had won the game. She didn't know the game hadn't even started. "Here," I said, putting the bowl of potatoes on the counter. "They're ready." "Good," Mom said. "Now do the beans." I took the beans. I snapped the ends off one by one. Snap, snap, snap. The sound was satisfying. It sounded like bones breaking. The kitchen became a furnace. The oven was set to 400 degrees, roasting the beef, while 4 burners fired simultaneously on the stove. I moved between them in a trance of efficiency. Stir the gravy, baste the meat, check the rolls, drain the beans. My blouse stuck to my lower back. My hair, which I had pinned up in the car, was starting to fray around the temples. In the other room, the party had started. I heard the doorbell chime again and again, announcing aunts, uncles, and cousins. I heard the roar of greetings, the exaggerated surprise, the tearing of wrapping paper. I heard the pop of a cork. I didn't go out. I wasn't invited to the party. I was staffing it. This was the pattern. It had been the pattern since I was 16. Hannah was the decoration. I was the infrastructure. Hannah was kept pristine for the guests. I was kept useful for the labor. I didn't object. I didn't storm out. I stayed because I needed the data. I needed to see if anyone would notice I was missing. I plated the appetizers, stuffed mushrooms, and bacon-wrapped dates, and carried the heavy slate tray to the door. I pushed it open with my hip. The living room was a sea of red and green sweaters. The heat was suffocating. Uncle Steve was recounting a golf game to my father. Aunt Linda was touching Hannah's hair, cooing over the color. I walked through the crowd. I offered the tray. "Oh, Claire," Aunt Linda said, taking a mushroom without looking at my face. "We didn't know you were here." "I've been in the kitchen," I said. "Well, these look store-bought," she said. "Delicious." "I made them," I said. She had already turned back to Hannah. "So tell us about the apartment, honey. Is it near the water?" I moved on. I was a ghost carrying pork products. I circled the room, clearing empty glasses, picking up discarded napkins. I was the help. The realization didn't hurt. It clarified. It stripped away the nostalgia. This wasn't a family gathering. It was a court, and I was the jester who had forgotten to be funny. I went back to the kitchen. The silence there was better. I leaned against the counter and drank a glass of tap water. My hands were trembling slightly. Not from fatigue, from adrenaline. The door swung open. Mom bustled in carrying a stack of dirty salad plates. She dumped them in the sink, splashing dressing onto my clean sleeve. "Claire, keep up," she snapped. "People are waiting for the main course." "I'm carving the beef now," I said. She stopped. She looked at me. It wasn't a look of gratitude. It was an appraisal of a faulty appliance. "You look exhausted," she said. "Are you sleeping? Or is this just the stress of whatever it is you're doing?" "I work a lot," I said. I picked up the carving knife. It was heavy German steel. "Work?" she scoffed softly. "You have projects, Claire. Hannah has a career. There's a difference." "I pay my bills, Mom." "Barely, I assume," she said. She opened the fridge and took out a bottle of white wine. "You're 28. By your age, your father and I had a house. We had a plan. You seem to be drifting, still figuring life out." I sliced the beef. The knife slid through the meat, pink and tender. 1 slice. 2 slices. "I have a plan," I said. "Do you?" She poured the wine. "Because from where we sit, it looks like you're flailing. It worries your father. He loses sleep over it. He wonders where we went wrong." She took a sip, her eyes over the rim of the glass watching me. She wanted a reaction. She wanted me to cry or apologize. "The meat is ready," I said. The door opened again. Dad. He came in for ice. He didn't look at the food. He looked at Mom. "They're asking for the wine," he said. Then he glanced at me. "Hannah's holding court out there. She's got the whole room laughing. That girl has drive. She wakes up and attacks the world." He scooped ice into his bucket. The cubes rattled aggressively. "Unlike some," he added. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. I kept slicing. The pile of meat grew. I absorbed the words like a boxer taking body shots. Drifting, flailing, unlike some. I stored them in the same mental file as the bank balances in the trunk. "I'll bring the roast out," I said. "Make sure you smile," Dad said, turning to leave. "Nobody likes a sour face at Christmas." I carried the platter into the dining room. The table was set with the good china, the gold-rimmed plates reserved for people who mattered. Everyone was seated. There was one empty chair at the far end near the kitchen door. My seat. I placed the meat in the center of the table. "Looks edible," Uncle Steve joked. "Sit down, Claire," Mom said. "Don't hover." I sat. I folded my napkin in my lap. "So, Claire," Uncle Steve boomed. He was red-faced 3 scotches deep. "Your dad says you're in Chicago. What are you doing up there, still trying to make that painting thing happen?" I hadn't painted since college. "No," I said. "I'm in logistics now. I run a consulting firm." The table went quiet. It was the silence of people politely ignoring a child's lie. "She's between things," my father said loudly. He picked up the wine bottle and filled Steve's glass. "She's trying out some business ideas. You know, Claire, always a new scheme." I looked at him. "It's not a scheme, Dad. It's a company." "Sure, honey," he said. He didn't look at me. "She's figuring it out. But let's talk about something solid. Hannah, tell Steve about the bonus structure at your new firm." Hannah smiled. She was sitting at Dad's right hand. She didn't look at me. She didn't correct him. She knew I wasn't between things. She knew I had referred her. Even if she didn't know I owned the company, she knew I had a connection to a major firm. She could have said Claire actually helped me get the interview. She said nothing. She took a bite of a roll and swallowed my erasure along with the butter. "The bonus is performance-based," Hannah said, turning her charm on Steve, "which is great for me because I plan to outperform everyone." I watched her. This was the betrayal. The parents were habit. The sister was a choice. She chose to let me be the failure so she could shine brighter. I waited for a break in the conversation. I needed to try one last time. I needed to be sure. "The dress is beautiful, Hannah," I said. My voice was steady. "And I'm proud of you, really. Landing a contract like that isn't easy." The table paused. It was a genuine offering. I laid it out on the white tablecloth like a peace treaty. Hannah looked at me. Her eyes were cool blue, detached. She didn't smile. She didn't say thanks. "Claire, you look nice too." She didn't say I appreciate that. "It's not easy if you don't know what you're doing," she said. "But I've been networking for years. I earned this. It's about time people recognized my value." She accepted the compliment as tribute. She took it and put it in her pocket and gave nothing back. "Hear, hear," Uncle Steve said. I looked down at my plate. The beef was cold. The peace treaty had been rejected. "A toast," my father announced. He stood up. He tapped his knife against his crystal goblet. The sound was sharp, a high-pitched demand for attention. The room fell silent. Faces turned toward him. He looked down at Hannah with a gaze so full of love it almost physically hurt to witness. "To family," he began, "and to success. It's been a hard year for many. But in this house we value hard work. We value results." He raised his glass higher. "To Hannah, for showing us all what it looks like to launch, for being the pride of this family. You're the one we bet on, kid, and you're paying off." "To Hannah," the table chorused. Glasses clinked. Mom chimed in, her voice high and tinkling. "And to Claire," she said. I looked up, a flicker of hope. "For making it here," Mom said, smiling tight. "And for this little culinary phase. At least until the next phase starts next month." The table erupted. Laughter. It wasn't mean-spirited to them. It was affectionate dismissal. It was the laughter of people watching a toddler try to walk and fall down. Oh, Claire. Classic Claire. I didn't laugh. I didn't drink. I watched Hannah. She was laughing the hardest. She wiped a tear from her eye. "Oh, God," Hannah gasped. "Remember the jewelry-making phase or the dog-walking business?" "I was 19, I said. "It's cute," Hannah said. "You're a free spirit, Claire. We love that about you. Someone has to be the cautionary tale, right?" More laughter. Okay, Dad said, sitting down. "Let's eat before it gets cold. Hannah, tell me more about this client, this Velox place. You said the owner is young. Yeah, Hannah said. She cut her meat with precision. David, the COO, sent me the onboarding packet this morning. I was skimming through the corporate structure. I stopped breathing. The onboarding packet. It contained the articles of organization. It listed the officers. And, Dad asked, who is the genius behind it? Some nobody, Hannah said. She took a sip of wine. I looked up the incorporation filing. It's a single-member LLC, founded 3 years ago. The registered agent is just a lawyer. She paused. She looked directly at me for a split second, then looked away. But the founder's name is listed on the signatory page, she said. C. Dawson. The air left the room for me. Dawson, Mom asked. That's funny. Common name, Dad said. Right, Hannah said. Common name. She smiled, a slow, cat-like smile. I asked David about it, Hannah continued. I made a joke. I said, hey, maybe I'm related to the boss. And David got really weird. He said, the owner prefers privacy, so I dropped it. She knew. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. She had seen C. Dawson. She had seen the address, my apartment address in Chicago, which she had mailed a birthday card to 3 months ago. She knew David got weird when she asked. She knew I owned Velox. Or at the very least, she knew I was high up enough to be the signatory. And she was sitting here eating the roast I cooked, letting our father call me a failure, letting our mother mock my phases, all while knowing I was the one signing her paycheck. Why? Because if she admitted it, she lost the spotlight. If she admitted I was the client, she wasn't the high-powered consultant who won a bid on merit. She was the little sister getting a handout. She preferred to humiliate me than to share the stage. Well, Hannah said, dismissing the topic. I'm sure he's just some trust fund kid using his dad's money. Doesn't matter. I'm going to run circles around him. That's the spirit, Dad said. I put my fork down. I couldn't swallow. The betrayal was absolute. It wasn't ignorance, it was strategy. She was monetizing my silence. Dinner ended. The plates were cleared by me. I scraped the leftovers into the trash. I loaded the dishwasher. The hot water vapor rose up, softening the makeup I had applied so carefully in the car mirror. The guests moved to the living room for coffee and pie. I stayed in the kitchen. I scrubbed the roasting pan. The black grease was stubborn. I scrubbed until my knuckles scraped the metal. Mom came in. She carried the dessert plates. The pie is good, she said. But the crust is a little tough. Did you overwork the dough? I followed the recipe, Mom. She sighed. She leaned against the counter looking at me. The guests were laughing in the other room. Hannah was telling a story. You know, Mom said. Her voice dropped. It wasn't kind. It was weary. I worry about you, Claire. I really do. I'm fine, Mom. Are you? She gestured to the sink to my stained apron. Look at you. You come home once a year, you don't talk about anything real. You have no career, no husband, no prospects. You just exist. I cooked the entire dinner, I said. I bought the gifts. Gifts. She waved a hand dismissively. It's not about things, Claire. It's about character. Hannah is building a life. You're just playing house. She stepped closer. The cruelty was quiet, intimate. You always show up empty-handed and expect love, she said. You expect us to just be happy you're breathing. But love is about what you bring to the table, and you never bring anything. She turned and walked out. I stood there. The water was running. My hands were covered in dish soap. They smelled of lemon and grease. Empty-handed. I looked at the drying rack. The knives were clean. The plates were clean. The job was done. I turned off the faucet. The silence in the kitchen was sudden and absolute. That was it. The line had been crossed. There was no going back. There was no maybe next year. There was no if I just explain it right. She had defined the terms. Love is about what you bring to the table. Okay, I whispered. I dried my hands on a towel. I took off the apron and folded it neatly on the counter. I smoothed my blouse. I checked my reflection in the dark window above the sink. My eyes were hard. The sadness was gone. I walked out of the kitchen. I didn't stop at the living room. I walked straight to the foyer to the mudroom. I picked up my tote bag. I reached to the bottom and pulled out the black leather portfolio. It felt cool in my hands. I unzipped it. I took out the 3 envelopes. I walked toward the dining room table. The guests had moved to the sofas, but the table was still the center of the room, the scene of the crime. It was time to see what happened when I stopped being empty-handed. My hands were dry. I had dried them until the skin felt like parchment scrubbing away the grease and the smell of the meal I had just served. I stood in the hallway, the threshold between the service quarters and the stage. In the living room, the laughter was a dull roar. Uncle Steve was telling a story about a boat. My father's laugh was a bark of approval. They were comfortable. They were sated. They were oblivious. I adjusted my cuffs. I felt the weight of the envelopes in my hand. They were light as paper, but they held the mass of 3 years of silence. I walked into the room. I didn't walk to the periphery where I usually stood. I walked to the dining table. It was empty now, save for the centerpiece of holly and candles. The wood was polished mahogany, my father's pride. I stood at the head of the table directly behind my father's empty chair. "Excuse me," I said. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke with the flat, projected tone I used in boardrooms when I needed to kill a bad idea. The conversation in the living room didn't stop immediately. It raggedly trailed off. Uncle Steve stopped mid-sentence. My mother looked up from the sofa, a coffee cup halfway to her mouth. Hannah turned her head, her eyes narrowing. She sensed the shift in barometric pressure before anyone else. "Claire," Mom asked, "what are you doing? We're having coffee." "I have something to give you," I said. "Since I came empty-handed." "Oh, for Christ's sake!" Dad sighed. He didn't stand up. He shouted from his armchair. "We don't need a speech, Claire. Come have some pie." "I don't want pie," I said. "I want you to look at the table." I laid the first envelope down. It made a crisp sound against the wood. "This is for you and Mom," I said. Dad frowned. He exchanged a look with Uncle Steve, the look men give each other when a woman is being hysterical. He groaned as he hauled himself out of the chair. He walked over, his movements stiff with annoyance. "What is this?" he asked. "A card. You could have put it under the tree." He picked it up. He opened the flap. He pulled out the check. I watched his face. I watched the annoyance drain away, replaced by a blank, slate-gray confusion. He squinted. He held the paper closer to the light. He read the numbers, then he read them again. 62,000. His voice trailed off. He looked at me, then back at the check. "Is this a joke?" "It's a cashier's check," I said. "Payable to First National. It covers the remaining principal on the mortgage plus the interest through January. The house is paid for." The room went dead silent. The fire crackled. Mom stood up. She walked over, her heels clicking on the hardwood. She took the check from Dad's hand. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "It's real," I said. I laid the second envelope down. "Hannah," I said, "this is for you." Hannah didn't move. She sat on the sofa, her red dress bright against the leather. She looked at the envelope like it was a bomb. "What is it?" she asked. Her voice was thin. "Open it," I said. She didn't. So Dad reached out and opened it for her. He was trembling now. The adrenaline of the money was hitting him. He pulled out the second check. 24,000, Dad whispered. He looked at Hannah. "It's your loans, the federal ones." Hannah's face went white. She stood up slowly. She walked to the table, not to look at the check, but to look at me. I laid the third envelope down. "And this," I said, "is for the food bank. $10,000, in the Dawson family name. Since we value community so much." 3 pieces of paper. $96,000. Lying on the mahogany where an hour ago I had been told I was drifting. "I don't understand," Mom said. She was gripping the edge of the table. "Claire, Where did you get this? Did you borrow money? Are you in trouble? It's my money, Mom. From where? Dad demanded. He looked at the check again, scrutinizing the payer line. This says, Velox Solutions. He froze. The name hung in the air. It traveled from the paper to his brain and then bounced across the room to Hannah. Hannah gasped. It was a sharp, involuntary intake of air. Velox, Dad repeated. He looked at me. That's Hannah's client, the new contract. Yes, I said. It is. I don't get it, Uncle Steve said from the couch. What's going on? I'm not between things, I said. My voice was calm. My heart was beating 40 times a minute. I am Velox Solutions. I founded it 3 years ago. I own 100% of the equity. We did $4 million in revenue last year. Dad looked at me. For the first time in my life, he didn't look down. He looked straight at me. But he wasn't seeing his daughter. He was seeing a predator he hadn't recognized. You, he said. You run a logistics firm. I built it. I corrected. From the ground up. While you were telling people I was finding myself, I was building a company that fixes supply chains for Fortune 500s. I turned to Hannah. She was standing very still. The color had not returned to her face. And 3 weeks ago, I said my COO David asked me if we should hire a boutique HR firm from Philly. He showed me a resume. It was yours, Hannah. No, Hannah whispered. I told him to give you the interview, I said. I told him to give you a shot. I signed the contract yesterday morning. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of confusion. It was the silence of a hierarchy shattering. You knew, Hannah said. Her voice was shaking. You set me up. I gave you a job, I said. I gave you the biggest win of your career. I handed it to you. You tricked me, Hannah shouted. It was a desperate defensive scream. You let me sit here and talk about it. You let me look like an idiot. I let you talk, I said, and I listened. I took a step closer to her. You told Dad you earned it. You told them you charmed the client. You took credit for networking when the only network you used was your last name. I didn't know, she protested. She looked at Dad, pleading for backup. I didn't know it was her. Drop it, Hannah, I said. You saw the signatory page. C. Dawson. You saw the address. It's my apartment. You sent a birthday card there 3 months ago. Hannah's mouth shut. Her eyes darted to the side. The tell. You knew, I said softly, or you suspected, but you didn't want it to be true, and you certainly didn't want them to know it was true, because if I'm the client, you're not the star. That's not true, she stammered. You recognize David, I said. There is a framed photo of me and David on his desk. It's right next to his monitor. You can't miss it. Hannah flinched. You saw it, I said. You knew I was successful. And you came here, ate the food I cooked, and watched Dad humiliate me. You joined in. You laughed about my phases while cashing my check. Now wait a minute, Dad said. He held up a hand. He was trying to regain control of the room. He looked at the checks, then at me. His brain was doing the calculus. The mortgage was paid. The debt was gone. He forced a smile. It was grotesque. Claire, he said, let's all calm down. If this is true, well, this is incredible. Why didn't you tell us? Would it have mattered? I asked. Of course it matters, Mom said. She was crying now, tears of relief and avarice. My God, Claire, you're successful. We're proud of you. This is so generous. She reached out to touch my arm. I stepped back. Generous, I repeated. Yes, Dad said. He picked up the mortgage check again. He tapped it. This changes everything. We can retire Claire. We can finally breathe. And Hannah, well, it stays in the family, right? One sister helping another. That's beautiful. He was rewriting the narrative in real time. I wasn't the failure anymore. I was the golden goose. He was ready to pivot. He was ready to take the money and pretend the last 10 years of dismissal never happened. "You're right," I said. "It does change everything." I looked at the envelopes on the table, the white rectangles against the dark wood. They looked like surrender flags. "Mom," I said, "you told me in the kitchen that love is about what you bring to the table." "I was stressed," Mom said quickly. "I didn't mean it like that." "You meant exactly that," I said. "You said I always show up empty-handed. You said I expect love without earning it." "Claire, please," Dad said. His voice had a warning edge now. He saw where I was looking. He saw my hand moving. "I brought these," I said, gesturing to the checks, "because I wanted to see if they were enough. I wanted to see if paying your debts would make you respect me." "We respect you," Dad said. "We're just shocked. You can't blame us for being shocked." "But then I listened to you tonight," I said. "I listened to you mock me. I listened to you apologize to your guests for my existence. I listened to Hannah lie to your faces while I washed her dishes." I reached out. I put my hand on the mortgage check. "Claire," Dad warned, "don't be childish." I picked it up. "No," Mom gasped. She lunged forward but stopped herself. I picked up the second check. Hannah's loans. I picked up the third check. The charity. I held them in my hand. They were just paper again. "These were for family," I said. "These were for people who supported me when I was building this. These were for people who believed in me when I was between things." "We are family," Dad shouted. His face was red. The veneer of politeness was gone. "I raised you. I put a roof over your head. You owe us." "I don't owe you a dime," I said. "I paid for my own college. I paid my own rent. I built my life in the vacuum you left." "You selfish little bitch," Hannah hissed. "Give me that check." "No," I said. I put the envelopes back in the portfolio. I zipped it shut. The sound was loud in the room. Zip. "You can't do this," Dad said. He was stepping toward me, his fists clenched. "You can't dangle this in front of us and take it away. That's sick, Claire." "It's not sick," I said. "It's business." I looked at him, then at Mom, then at Hannah. "You don't get to benefit from me and mock me in the same breath," I said. "That's the boundary. You crossed it." "I'll disown you," Dad threatened. He was shaking. "I swear to God, Claire, if you walk out with that money, don't come back. You're dead to us." "I was already dead to you," I said. "I was just a ghost who cooked your dinner." "Claire, please," Mom sobbed. "The house. We're drowning. Please." It was the first time she had pleaded with me. It wasn't for love. It wasn't for connection. It was for the $62,000. "I know," I said. "I saw the statements. You should probably cut back on the wine." I turned my back on them. "And Hannah," I said, looking over my shoulder. She was trembling, hate radiating off her in waves. "The contract with Velox is void," I said. "There's a clause in the engagement letter. Conflict of interest. I'm invoking it. You're fired." I didn't wait for the scream. I walked toward the foyer. The silence behind me shattered. Dad was shouting. Mom was wailing. Hannah was throwing something. I heard glass break against the wall. I kept walking. I walked past the Christmas tree. I walked past the garland. I walked into the mudroom and put on my coat. I picked up the tote bag with the portfolio inside. It felt lighter now. It felt like freedom. I opened the front door. The cold air rushed in, cleansing the heat of the house. I stepped out into the snow. The door didn't close behind me. I could hear them coming into the hallway, yelling my name, yelling about the money. I didn't look back. I walked to the car, my boots steady on the ice. I had the receipts. I had the truth. And for the first time in 3 years, I had absolutely nothing to hide. I reached the car door before I heard the front door bang against the siding. I didn't flinch. I unlocked the driver's side, the mechanism clicking loudly in the cold air. "Claire." My father stood on the porch. He hadn't put on a coat. He was standing in his dress shirt and slacks, the wind whipping the fabric against his ribs. He looked smaller than he had in the living room. Without the fireplace and the armchair, without the audience of relatives to nod at his wisdom, he was just an angry old man shivering in the snow. I opened the back door of the car. On the seat sat the apple pie I had baked that morning. It was in a disposable tin covered in foil. I had left it there because there wasn't room in the kitchen fridge. I picked it up. It was cold solid. "Put that back!" Dad yelled. He walked down the steps, ignoring the ice. "You don't get to just walk away. Get back in the house." I placed the pie on the passenger seat of the car. I secured it with the seatbelt. It was absurd, but it was necessary. I had peeled the apples. I had made the crust. It was the only thing in that house that was purely mine. "I'm leaving, Dad." "You're running away," he spat. He stopped a few feet from me. He was breathing hard, his breath pluming in white clouds. "Like a coward. You drop a bomb like that and then you run." "I didn't drop a bomb," I said. "I showed you the receipts." "You humiliated your sister," he said. "You humiliated your mother, on Christmas." "I told the truth," I said. "You just didn't like the price tag." He pointed a finger at me. It was shaking. "You're selfish, Claire. You've always been selfish. You think because you have money now you're better than us. You think you can buy respect." "I didn't try to buy it," I said. "I tried to pay off your debts. There's a difference." "If you leave now," he said, his voice dropping to a low, jagged growl, "don't come back, I mean it. You step into that car and you're done. No calls. No holidays. You're out." I looked at him. I looked at the house behind him. I could see Mom in the window watching. I could see the silhouette of Hannah standing behind her. They were waiting to see if the threat worked. They were waiting for me to fold, to apologize, to hand over the checks just to keep the peace. That was the old currency. "I know," I said. "You know what? I know I'm done," I said. "You can call it disowning me if that makes you feel powerful. You can tell Uncle Steve I had a breakdown. You can tell the neighbors I'm ungrateful. Call it whatever you need to call it to sleep tonight." "Claire." "But I'm keeping the money," I said. "And I'm keeping my dignity. You don't get both." I got into the car. I slammed the door. It was a heavy final sound. I locked it. Dad stood by the window for a second, his face twisted in a rictus of impotent rage. Then he slapped the glass with his open palm. I started the engine. I didn't look at him. I put the car in reverse and backed down the driveway. The tires spun briefly on the ice, then caught. I drove away. I watched the house shrink in the rearview mirror until the Christmas lights blurred into a single indistinguishable smear of red and green. I drove for 20 minutes without a destination. The heater blasted against my frozen hands. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving behind a hollow, vibrating exhaustion. My stomach rumbled. I hadn't eaten since breakfast. I had cooked a roast mash, 10 pounds of potatoes, and trimmed 2 pounds of beans, but I hadn't eaten a bite. I saw a neon sign cutting through the darkness. The Parkway Diner. Open 24 hours. I pulled in. The lot was mostly empty, just a couple of long-haul trucks idling in the back. I parked under a flickering street lamp. I grabbed my tote bag. I grabbed the pie from the passenger seat. The diner smelled of coffee sanitizer and old grease. It was the best smell in the world. It smelled honest. There were no wreaths here. No performance. Just linoleum and fluorescent lights. I sat in a booth by the window. A waitress walked over. She was older, maybe 60, with tired eyes and a name tag that said Barb. "Merry Christmas, hon," she said. She didn't smile, but her voice wasn't unkind. It was just factual. "Menu." "Just coffee, please," I said. "And maybe some toast." "I can do toast," she said. She looked at the pie tin on the table. "That yours?" "Yeah," I said. "Homemade." "Looks heavy," she said. "You want a fork?" I looked at her. "Can I eat outside food?" "It's Christmas," Barb said. "I don't give a damn. I'll bring you a plate." She walked away. I opened the tote bag. I pulled out the leather portfolio. I unzipped it and took out the third envelope, the one for St. Jude's. $10,000. I looked at the payee line. St. Jude's Food Bank. I looked at the memo line. I had written in neat architectural script donation from the Dawson family. I took a pen from my bag. I drew a single heavy line through the Dawson family. Below it I wrote, Claire Dawson. It wasn't petty, it was accurate. The Dawson family didn't make this donation. The Dawson family didn't care about the food bank, they cared about the appearance of caring. I cared about the food. I thought about mailing it. Then I thought about the logistics. The mail would be slow. The holiday rush. I looked up as Barb returned with the coffee and a plate. Here you go, she said. She poured the coffee. It was hot and black and strong. You waiting for someone? No, I said. Just me. Better that way sometimes, she said. Less fighting. She started to walk away. Barb, I said. Do you know where the shelter drop-off is? The one on 4th? Sure, she said. Behind the Methodist church. Why? I have a donation, I said. I need to drop it off tonight. They got a box, she said. Or if lights are on, Father Mike is there. He don't sleep. Thanks. She nodded and went back to the counter. She treated me like a human being. She didn't ask what I did for a living. She didn't compare me to a sister. She gave me a plate for my own pie. I cut a slice. The crust was flaky, the apples tart. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. I ate in silence, watching the snow fall against the glass. For years I had told myself a story. I told myself I was hiding the success to protect them. I told myself I didn't want to make them feel small. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment to surprise them, like a reality TV reveal where everyone cries and hugs and the problems vanish under a pile of cash. That was a lie. I looked at the check again. I hadn't hidden the money to protect them. I had hidden it to protect myself. I knew. Deep down I always knew. I knew that the moment they saw the balance sheet, I would cease to be a daughter and become an asset. I knew that Hannah would hate me for disrupting the hierarchy. I knew my father would feel emasculated and then entitled. I had been protecting the fantasy. As long as I was the struggling artist, or the drifter, I could pretend that their criticism was just misguided parenting. I could pretend that if I just succeeded, they would be proud. But by hiding the success, I kept the hope alive. Tonight, I killed the hope. I put the money on the table and they didn't see me. They saw the mortgage payment. They saw the loan forgiveness. They saw the ATM. I took a sip of coffee. The bitterness was grounding. I wasn't mourning the money. I could make more money. I was mourning the family I wanted. I was mourning the version of my father who would say, "I'm proud of you," before he looked at the check. I was mourning the sister who would say, "Congratulations," instead of, "You tricked me." That family didn't exist. They never had. I finished the slice of pie. I put the check back in the envelope and sealed it. I left a $20 bill on the table for a $2 coffee. "Merry Christmas, Barb," I called out. "Safe travels, hun," she said from the back. I walked out to the car. The snow was coming down harder now, erasing my tracks as soon as I made them. I had a stop to make at the church, and then I had a long drive back to Chicago. I had a company to run. I had a life to live. And for the first time, it was entirely, undeniably mine. The phone didn't stop vibrating for 3 days. I left it on the kitchen counter of my Chicago apartment face down. I watched it buzz against the marble, a little angry beetle trying to flip itself over. I didn't pick up. I unpacked my bag. I put the cashmere scarf I had bought for myself, originally intended for my mother, into the drawer. I put the bottle of 18-year-old scotch on my bar cart. I went to the office. I worked. I signed the paperwork to formally terminate the contract with Hannah's firm. I didn't offer an explanation beyond the contractual clause. I didn't have to. On the 4th day I answered. It was a Tuesday evening. I was drinking tea, looking out at the city lights. The phone buzzed. Mom. I swiped green. I put it on speaker. "Claire." Her voice was tight, high-pitched. It was the voice she used when she was trying to return a dress she had already worn. "I'm here, Mom." "Oh, thank God. We've been sick with worry. Your father, He hasn't slept. I'm fine, I said. We need to talk about Christmas, she said. She didn't wait for permission. She rushed into the script. We're sorry things got heated. Your father has a temper, you know that, and Hannah, well, she was just embarrassed. But we're family, Claire. We forgive each other. That's what we do. There it was, the eraser. The attempt to wipe the board clean without actually reading what was written on it. I appreciate the apology, I said. Good, she breathed. Good. We want you to come home for Easter. We can start over. And your father was wondering about the checks. Surely you didn't mean to just stop, I said. The silence on the line was brittle. The checks are gone, Mom. The mortgage is yours. The loans are Hannah's. That money is reallocated. But Claire, listen to me, I said. My voice was low and steady. If you want a relationship with me, things are going to be different. I am not an ATM. I am not a punching bag. And I am not a failure you get to tolerate. We never said you were a failure. You said I was between things. You let Dad mock me. You let Hannah lie. I took a sip of tea. Here are the terms. You treat me with the same respect you treat Hannah. You do not ask me for money, ever. And you do not talk about Hannah's success to make me feel small. If you break these rules, I hang up. If you break them twice, I don't visit. You're being very hard, Mom said quietly. You've changed. I haven't changed, I said. I just stopped paying you to be nice to me. And the house, she asked. We counted on that check, Claire, after you showed it to us. You have equity, I said. Refinance. Or downsize. It's just a building, Mom. You'll figure it out. I hung up. I didn't feel guilty. I felt like I had just set a broken bone. It hurt, but it was finally straight. The winter thawed into spring. The consequences of that night played out in slow, grinding realism. There were no explosions, no lawsuits, just the dull ache of reality setting in. My parents refinanced the house. It wasn't a tragedy. They just had to reset their retirement timeline by 5 years. They sold the boat they rarely used. They stopped going to the country club for Sunday brunch. The appearance of wealth had to be sacrificed to save the reality of their solvency. Hannah didn't lose her job. I didn't demand she be fired. I wasn't interested in destroying her. I was interested in removing my subsidy. Without the Velox contract, her flagship win, her bonus was cut in half. She had to start paying her own student loans. I heard through a cousin that she had moved into a smaller apartment, one without a doorman. She was working 60-hour weeks, actually cold calling clients, actually grinding. She was finally doing the work she had pretended to have already done. It was the best thing that could have happened to her. She sent me a text in June. Happy birthday. That was it. I texted back, thanks. We weren't friends. We might never be friends. But we were no longer playing a game where she won and I lost. We were just two women living in different cities paying our own bills. The hierarchy was gone. A year passed. The snow came back to Chicago, burying the streets in gray slush. But up in my apartment, it was warm. It was Christmas Eve. My apartment wasn't a fortress. It was an open space smelling of garlic and rosemary. I wasn't alone. David was there chopping carrots at the island. He was wearing a ridiculous Santa hat and drinking a beer. Sarah, my head of operations, was whisking vinaigrette. 2 other friends, people I knew from the neighborhood, not the boardroom, were setting the table. Claire, this roast is huge, David said. How many people are coming? Enough to eat it, I said. I was at the stove. I was stirring the gravy. But I wasn't exiled. I was in the center of the conversation. Hey, Sarah asked. Did you hear from your folks? Yeah, I said. They sent a card and a scarf. A nice scarf. It's wool, I said. It scratches a little, but it's fine. It was fine. They had stayed within the boundaries. They hadn't asked for money. They hadn't made a dig about my life. It was a cold, distant politeness, but it was respectful. It was a relationship I could live with. Gravy's done, I announced. I'll take it, David said. He took the pan from my hand. Go sit down. You've been on your feet all day. I'm okay, I said. Sit, he insisted. It's Christmas. We served the chef. I walked to the table. I sat down. The view out the window was a grid of golden lights against the darkness. The snow was falling softly, coating the city in silence. I looked at the table. The plates were mismatched, some from college, some I'd bought at an antique store. The napkins were paper. The wine was decent but not showy. There were no envelopes under the tree. There were no grand gestures. There was just food and warmth and people who knew exactly who I was and liked me anyway. David brought the roast over. Sarah poured the wine. Everyone sat down. There was the scraping of chairs, the murmur of anticipation. To Claire, David said, raising his glass. For hosting. To the chef, Sarah added. I raised my glass. I looked at them. I didn't feel the need to prove anything. I didn't feel the need to buy their affection or test their loyalty. The test was over. To plenty, I said. We drank, we ate. The laughter was loud and real. And for the first time in my life on Christmas Eve, I didn't feel empty-handed. I felt full. And so Claire finally chose her own peace over the constant striving for acceptance. If this story of boundaries and the quiet power of truth resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into complex family dynamics. We read every single comment of your thoughts on Claire's ultimate decision, so please share them below. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Revenge Radiance. We'll see you next time.